as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank and, of course, fun every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain. I'm not afraid to give you a platform and say it how it is.
Come on, make the case. Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show.
God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world.
Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to Friday Morning with Esther and Philip. We've got a great show lined up for you today.
We'll be joined by the Qatari Ambassador to the UK to talk about the controversy surrounding the upcoming World Cup.
We'll also be debating feminism in 2022 and, of course, the ongoing migrant crisis.
And as ever, we want to hear from you this morning. So if you want to get involved in the show, you know what to do. Email us on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. But before we kick off, here's your latest headlines with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Esther. Good morning. It's 1 minute past 10. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Chancellor's reportedly looking at raising capital gains tax to address the £50 billion black hole in public finances. The tax covers the sale of assets such as shares and second properties. It's understood a source close to Jeremy Hunt has confirmed the hikes are being considered, but insisted no decisions had yet been taken. The Bank of England yesterday hiked the interest rate to 3% and warned the UK is heading into what could be the longest recession in at least a century. The Sizewell C nuclear power plant in Suffolk is also under review as the government tries to cut spending. The new site was part of Boris Johnson's final policy speech as he sought to make energy security part of his legacy as Prime Minister. But critics have argued it'll be expensive and take years to build. Negotiations on raising funds for Sizewell C are understood to be ongoing. The HS2 high-speed rail line in the north of England and other major infrastructure projects are also being assessed. The Northern Ireland Secretary has confirmed there will be no Stormont Assembly election before Christmas. Chris Heaton-Harris had said he'd call another poll after the deadline to restore power sharing passed last week. The law requires an election within 12 weeks of that 28th of October deadline, but he's confirmed it won't happen next month. The devolved government hasn't functioned since February, with the Democratic Unionist Party blocking the formation of the ruling executive in protest against the Northern Ireland Protocol. The First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, will answer questions about the procurement of 2 ferries, which are reportedly over budget and behind schedule. The Holyrood's Public Audit Committee will ask about the 2 ships that are now due for completion in 2023 and 2024 at a cost 3 times the initial contract. Primary school children running drugs for gangs has become the norm, the former Children's Commissioner has warned. In a report by the Commission on Young Lives, it warns of a crisis putting hundreds of thousands of children in England at risk of violence. It said a combination of COVID and the cost of living crisis make it easier for children to be exploited. Elsewhere, Ukraine's president says 4.5 million people in his country are temporarily without power following Russian attacks. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that more than 10% of the pre-war population are without power. In his nightly video address, he said those affected are in the capital, Kyiv, and 10 other regions. In recent weeks, Russia has intensified its campaign to strike critical energy supplies. Donald Trump has dropped one of his strongest hints yet that he may run for the White House again.
In order to make our country successful and safe and glorious, I will very, very, very probably do it again, okay? Very, very, very probably.
Speaking to a crowd in Iowa, the former US president teased a strong possibility of a comeback. It's the first of 4 rallies in 5 days for the Republican as he campaigns for candidates in next week's midterm elections. Meanwhile, US President Joe Biden will be rallying with former President Barack Obama on Saturday in Pennsylvania. Twitter will lay off employees today. This comes following a week of uncertainty about the company's future. When Elon Musk took over Twitter, he fired the chief executive and top finance and legal executives. He's looking to find $1 billion in annual company savings to put the company, as he puts it, on a healthy path. Hundreds of workers at Heathrow Airport will strike in the run-up to the World Cup. Union Unite says 700 staff working in ground handling, airside transport and cargo will walk out in a dispute over better pay for 3 days from November the 18th. A patient who's had COVID for 411 days has now tested negative. The doctors say that thanks to a cocktail of drugs that the 59-year-old is taken, well, he's now cured. The man has a weakened immune system following a kidney transplant and is thought to be one of the longest living patients with a persistent COVID infection. And the King will host a reception at Buckingham Palace for business figures and NGOs ahead of the UN Climate Change Summit, COP27. King Charles will have more than 200 guests from across the globe. The Prime Minister will be among those attending after his U-turn on attending the summit. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Esther and Philip.
Welcome to the show. Now, I've got a question. How many verys do you need for it to mean certainly? Because you had Trump there saying, I will very, very, very probably be running to be the president. But how many verys to be certain?
Is 3 certain? You didn't say. He
didn't say yes, and he didn't
say 4.
No, I know, and he didn't say yes, I definitely will. But he was very, very, very probably. Anyway, just asking, just thrown out there.
Depends if Biden stands. I think he wants to have another go at Biden.
If Biden stands, it's certainly absolutely. OK, that's what it is then. So, back to the show. How popular are the members of the Cabinet? Well, every month, Conservative Home website conducts a survey of its members to determine just that. And the first such survey covering Rishi Sunak's Cabinet has just been released.
We're joined now by the man behind the survey, Paul Goodman, the editor of Conservative Home. Paul, thanks for joining us this morning. So,
hi, pleasure to see you.
What should we take from the first survey of the Rishi Sunak cabinet? Who's up and who's down?
I mean, just by way of introduction, Conservative Home's been doing these surveys of party members for the best part of 10 years. So we've got a lot of experience to draw on. And I think what this first survey is telling us is that, frankly, party members are feeling their way. They've seen a lot of change. They've only just got used to doing the last monthly survey on the Liz Truss cabinet before it disappeared. So they're a bit cautious with this one. But basically, what stood out for me was there were 3 people doing very well. Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, continues to top the table. James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, and Kemi Badenoch continues to do very well. Your colleague Gavin Williamson, I'm afraid, is in negative ratings. Rishi Sunak's doing okay. But I thought the most interesting one of all was that Suella Braverman, who's been in the news all week, this very tough-minded Home Secretary who wants to get on top of migration, she was actually 5th from bottom, which I thought was a very intriguing result.
I thought that was surprising as well, because I always thought that she was sort of the darling of the Tory members. The other thing that struck me about the survey, Paul, was that Rishi Sunak was ahead of Penny Mordaunt, and of course it was speculated that, you know, if Rishi had faced a challenger in the leadership contest, it had gone to a vote of the members, that whether it was Boris or Penny Mordaunt, he would have lost. But that would rather indicate that perhaps that wasn't right, and perhaps he's more popular with the members than people presumed.
Well, just a footnote on Suella Braverman. I think the reason why she was so low, I think, isn't because the members believed all these various attacks on her. My reading of it, and everyone must make their own decision, is just that the members are actually a bit doubtful whether it'll actually ever be done. And that's the reason why she didn't come up well. On Rishi Sunak, I think there's a tendency of the members to rally round and support the leaders. So we did another question about who would you have voted for, Rishi Sunak or Boris Johnson? And Rishi Sunak got 50%. Now, to be perfectly frank with you, I think maybe in a ballot, real ballot, if it had actually happened, maybe Rishi Sunak would have won. But I think there's a certain amount of after the event thinking here in that now Rishi Sunak is the leader, members want to rally behind him, which is very sensible that is too.
And a couple of things that I saw, you're quite right, the 3 at the top, Ben Wallace, Kemi Badenoch and James Cleverly, I thought most of those were out the country most of the time. Maybe that's how you make sure you're at the top of the table. You're out the country so everybody sees less of you. But the other thing, Jeremy Hunt was mid-table, and I thought that was interesting, but I'm wondering where he'll go after the financial statement, which will probably be your next league table.
I think there are 2 points about this. I mean, one is that people who are on the centre-right of the Conservative Party tend to poll better in the survey than the members who are on the centre-left, which is where Jeremy Hunt is. The other thing about all this, I'm afraid, and I think it's a very bad comment on our times, is that people tend to start getting fed up with politicians just when they've got old enough to learn from their mistakes. And I think there's always been a sort of element of boredom among the people who were surveyed with Jeremy Hunt, which I think is unfair. I think Hunt's a really good politician. I think he's extremely experienced. I think there's nothing about the health service he doesn't know. But, you know, as you know, there's a bit of sort of consumer attitude to politicians. So there's a big, well, we've done that, bring on the next one.
Absolutely. Look, fantastic to see you, and see you again soon. And hopefully we'll have you in the studio, Paul Goodman. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Now, the World Cup being hosted in Qatar starts on the 20th of November, and it's fair to say it's been surrounded by some controversy.
The Middle Eastern country has been widely criticised for its stance on same-sex relationships, its human rights record and its treatment of migrant workers.
But FIFA has written to all 32 teams competing in the competition, urging them to focus on the football.
Well, we're delighted now to be joined by the Ambassador of Qatar to the UK, Farhad bin Mohammed Al Attiyah. Hello and good morning.
Good morning to you, Esther. Thank you very much, Philip, for having me.
So really, what can people expect from the tournament in Qatar? I mean, what's it going to be like when the tournament's happening, temperature-wise? What's going to be happening?
Well, first of all, they would expect warm hospitality, generosity, kindness by the host nation. They would expect an amazing organization, hopefully a safe and secure tournament, and above all, a great time to be in the Middle East. The weather would be around 24 degrees, better than what we have today here, and fans will have the all the amenities and the facilities to enjoy the fantastic infrastructure that exists, the culture, and many more things.
Mr. Ambassador, how many England and Wales fans are you actually expecting to make the trip to Qatar for the World Cup? And if people don't have a ticket for matches, are they still able to come to Qatar to take in the atmosphere?
Absolutely. I mean, the UK ranks fourth amongst all countries that have bought the tickets to this tournament, and therefore we would expect quite a number from English and Welsh fans to attend the tournament. And for those who don't have a ticket, they would definitely have the chance of enjoying the atmosphere, because every ticket holder would be issued with something called a Haya card, which is a card that one has to obtain once they get the ticket. And with each and every Haya card holder, everyone can bring +3 with them. Equally, on the 2nd of December, which is after the group stages, people can come without holding a Haya card and without holding a ticket to the tournament, for which they can come and enjoy the atmosphere around it and the fan zones that exist. So there's plenty of opportunities for people from England and Wales, all over the world, to come and enjoy without having a ticket.
And for those that are going, what can they do in Qatar when the football's not on?
Qatar is a peninsula after all, and we have lots of beautiful sandy beaches and lovely sun. And there's plenty of cultural programs that are going to be delivered for the fans of the World Cup. We have museums, exhibitions, music. Let me say that Glastonbury is going to probably be, not Glastonbury the festival, but the Arcada Spider is going to be in Qatar for which is normally featured in the Glastonbury Festival. So fans will have some familiar features if they're fans of Glastonbury, if they're attending the World Cup. There's lots to do. I mean, plenty of fan zones. Each will feature special programs, cultural, social, and musical. One should go and look up actually the website of Qatar Tourism, and there's another website called Qatar Creates, which will feature lots of cultural activities. And I would say, try and have a dinner or a lunch at the Qatari house to enjoy Qatari hospitality.
And how popular is football in Qatar? I mean, how excited are people in Qatar about the World Cup coming to their country?
Very excited, I have to say. Football has been in and around in Qatar from the early 40s, as when oil was discovered. And the story goes that first oil workers have enjoyed playing football at that time. And today you have Qataris who are fans of all international clubs, such as, Chelsea, Tottenham, and all the different clubs around the world, Barcelona, Real Madrid, though some of them have never traveled to these countries. But it shows you how international the game has been, and especially to Qataris. And Qatar has been hosting international tournaments for well over 3 decades, and hopefully will continue to do so. So football is really the most, I would say, the popular sport in Qatar, and will continue to be so.
Now, I have to mention the ILO report released this week, and that's Qatar had undertaken, it says, comprehensive labour reforms to improve the conditions of hundreds of thousands of migrant workers in Qatar. However, some people still continue to sort of raise the questions about workers' rights and migrants' deaths related to the buildings of the stadium. So what is your response to that?
Well, I could only say that we have taken extensive reforms over the years to protect the safety, rights and welfare of all workers. And we have gone so far, so fast, and which makes us leaders in the region in terms of labour reforms. We have introduced minimum wage, which covers 96% of all the workforce. The ILO itself in 2021 highlighted material improvements in occupational injuries. One can just go and look up that report. In 2 years alone, we have managed to stop roughly around 500 companies from working because of our stringent implementation of the rules, and we will continue to do so. And we became the first country in the region to have non-discriminatory minimum wage that applies to all workers of all nationalities, of all sectors. And we welcome the level of scrutiny that happened because it helped us speed up and progress the reforms. But we want people to be fair and just and look at the facts as they stand and refer to the credible organizations that have their reports, which is all published, and look it up for themselves and not be subject to hearsay.
Mr. Ambassador, for many people, this will be their first time visiting Qatar, the fans that are going there, and in fact maybe the whole of the Middle East region. What should fans be aware of in terms of local laws and local customs? Well,
I mean, Qatar is an open and inclusive society that really prides itself for its hospitality. I'd like to remind everyone that we are host to well over 150 nationalities who live in Qatar. 21,000 Britons call Qatar home, and so people from all faiths, all walks of life, all backgrounds live and reside in our country, and so we are a Muslim nation with our own norms and culture, and like people in Europe or in any part of the world would expect us to come and respect their norms. Simply, that is what has been asked from our side, and that should not in any way or shape or form alter the way you go about life, regardless of wherever you are. It's just one is hoping that people would be considerate to such norms, and they're not entirely different to many other countries.
And just finally, the Qatar World Cup's the first to be held in an Arab and Muslim country. What do you hope the legacy is going to be for Qatar from hosting this World Cup?
Chief, I would say, is mutual understanding, dialogue, cooperation. I mean, if you look at the current context where we where we stand today in terms of the level of tension, distrust that exists. I think tournaments like the World Cup that brings well over 32 nations to come and celebrate and support the national teams. I think it's an opportunity for us to set the button restart again and see how we can engage with one another. I mean, one of the main legacies for Qatar itself is having to learn from international engagement. There's lots of British companies and British service providers that have come and lend us a hand in the development That is a huge capacity development support that now this knowledge would reside in Qatar with our people and hopefully be used in organizing future tournaments. So very much these big events do bring a lot of legacy, not only for the host country, but also for the people who are coming from abroad to get to learn about another culture that they would otherwise not experience, not having these tournaments.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much indeed for taking time out of your schedule to speak to us this morning. We really appreciate it, and we very much hope that you'll make sure that either England or Wales actually win the World Cup as well. If you can just do that, we'd be very,
We'll be back.
We'll be very grateful. Thank you very much.
Now, a couple of interesting things that he said there as well, wasn't it? You know, we have our own cultures, we have our own way of doing things, and it is an appreciation when people come and visit a different country. I remember when I was a kid, my parents loved travelling around the world. I remember going to the Far East and different places, and they'd say, you cannot do this. Do not expect to do this, that and the other in another country. And because we were going to another country, we abided by their rules. We didn't try and do it.
Yeah, no,
I think that's...
We expect people who come here to abide by our customs, and I think it's...
Well, we're more open-minded, aren't we? We sort of let people do what they want. Anyway, we want to hear from you. We want to hear from you about that. Anyway, coming up after the break, we'll be discussing the ongoing migrant crisis. So don't go anywhere.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Welcome back to the show. It's 10:26. Now, some senior Tory MPs have warned that the Home Secretary's immigration rhetoric risks fueling support for far-right extremists after she described the Channel migrant crisis as an invasion.
Suella Braverman admitted that the asylum system is broken because illegal immigration is out of control. The Prime Minister has defended the Home Secretary's approach to coping with the crisis.
Let's cross over now to GB News political reporter Olivia Otley for the latest. Hi, Olivia. What's going on there?
Well, hello. Well, there's no doubt at all that the migrant crisis is fast becoming the biggest and most pressing political issue facing the new Prime Minister. Just to put it in some context, between May and September of this year, over 11,000 Albanians crossed the Channel in small boats, which is compared to just 815 Albanians throughout the whole of 2021. The problem then, of course, is that the detention centres here just aren't made up to process that volume of people, and so they're getting sent off to hotels, which was resulting in legal complaints from certain councils who don't like that the hotels are being taken over, or they're just being dumped in Victoria Station, which is what happened yesterday. Astonishing though it sounds, 11 migrants were just left in the middle of Victoria Station wearing just flip-flops and no winter coats. So it's become a huge issue, and Suella Braverman has spoken very firmly about it, and the Prime Minister has backed her up doing that. She's received quite a lot of criticism for that. But rhetoric only goes so far. The Prime Minister is now going to have to come up with a plan. The plan so far seems to be to unwind the modern slavery legislation. That was legislation brought in by Theresa May, which meant that anyone who was a victim of modern slavery could claim political asylum in this country. The problem is it's become quite a big loophole in the immigration system because the burden of proof is quite low. So anyone who claims that they are a victim of modern slavery ends up 90% of Albanians, for example, this year have had their claims accepted. So it's a big, big political problem that is now in front of Rishi Sunak, and it's going to be very, very difficult to unwind it.
Olivia, thank you very much indeed for joining us and for that update. Joining us now to discuss the ongoing crisis is the Director of New Culture Forum, Peter Whittle. So, Peter, was the Home Secretary right to describe the illegal immigration coming into the country as an invasion?
I have no problem with it, really, simply because I think what's happening now is what always happens. The emphasis comes on language, you know, it goes right away from the actual substantive issue, and it becomes about the way, you know, that she's actually described it. This always happens. I think that basically, and I think there's a poll out today showing this, most people are probably behind her in what she's trying to do. I remain sceptical about it simply because the whole, as we've seen from the census this week, you know, the past 10 years has seen a huge rise in migration, you know, legal migration, and it's all been under Conservative rule. So why should it be any different this time? But I think that she is maybe sincere. That's maybe the difference.
I guess the issue is that everybody's busy admiring the problem. We can all identify what the problem is, and I think, you know, we're all frustrated, angry about what's going on. The public are angry about what's going on. From what I detect, the government are angry about what's going on. What we seem short of from everybody is what is the solution, the short-term solution to this problem. So what would you say is the short-term solution?
Well, I think, first of all, I mean, there's got to be political will. You know, this is the point, is that we haven't had, and I would still say we don't really have, on a wide basis, political will to actually deal with migration. You know, and I'm talking here about the whole of migration. You know, so I think it's something like 2.5 million people now in the past 10 years, foreign-born in England now. Gone up, it's now 16% now foreign-born. This is simply unsustainable, an overused word, but it just is. I think that what we've got to do as a matter of absolute urgency is to break this link between migration and mass migration. Because as it stands at the moment, you've kind of got to be in favour of it all or not at all. But the fact is, most people in this country are reasonable and they know that moderate migration is what any civilised country has. But what we have is not moderate migration. 250,000 net a year is not moderate. It's historically unprecedented.
Yeah, and I think, you know, going back to the words in the first place that Suella used, maybe people would say that was sort of colloquialism, what people are saying. They did feel invaded by. They are seeing people come in. You've seen over 40,000 people now come across just in dinghies alone. You could be waking up to people down the bottom of your road, some of them in your house. So they get that. But as Philip said, is how do we break the links? And Suella Braverman has gone in there. And when you're talking about that, people actually say we were talking about the list of cabinet members and where they were in the league table. She was low down, but Karen thinks here actually she'd be right at the top there because she is going forward with, and it would have to be a whole set of changes coming out of the European Court of Human Rights, and it is all of the political class coming on board. Remember, there is an industry of lawyers who have a reason to appeal every decision going on, but actually what I do want to to see is a breakdown between the political classes, the legal classes, and the people on the ground who are suffering, because people are saying, gosh, they're in hotels, 4-star hotels, right next to me, and people are now seeing it in a very different way. So we don't want to whip up, we need to solve the problem, is what we're saying.
Absolutely, but there has been a breakdown. There's been a huge gulf between what the political class thinks about immigration and what the population does. And that's been the case time immemorial, actually. It's becoming more critical now. And I think particularly people, you mentioned about people being quite understandably upset at 4-star hotels being used, when people are in poverty in this country. We've got a huge recession around the corner. We've got an NHS which is in crisis. We've got a housing crisis, which actually is a migration crisis, I would say. It is insane to bring 2.5 million people over 10 years.
You've raised
Peter,
you've raised a lot of issues. We'll definitely have you back on again to follow this. But if you're right, £7 million a day in hotels, when some people are saying, I can't afford my mortgage. Exactly. I mean, people are having problems. Look, we want to hear from you. We've got some views, I'll be reading them out, but get in touch with us, what you think.
Coming up, we'll be discussing exactly what feminism means in 2022. But first, it's time for your latest headlines with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Philip. It's 10:33, your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The government's under increasing pressure to balance the books after the Bank of England warns the UK is facing the longest recession in a century. The Chancellor is reportedly looking at raising capital gains and dividend tax to address the £50 billion black hole in public finances. The tax covers the sale of assets such as shares and second properties. The Sizewell C nuclear power plant in Suffolk is also under review as part of spending cuts. The new site was part of Boris Johnson's final policy speech as he sought to make energy security part of his legacy as Prime Minister. Critics have argued it'll be expensive and take years to build. The HS2 high-speed rail line in the north of England and other major projects are also being assessed. The Northern Ireland Secretary has confirmed there'll be no Stormont Assembly election before Christmas. Chris Heaton-Harris says he'll make a statement on the next steps in Parliament next week. Sinn Féin says the decision should have been made a week ago and described the delay as an example of classic Tory chaos. Twitter will lay off employees today. It follows a week of uncertainty about the company's future. Elon Musk fired the chief executive and top finance and legal executives when he took over last week. He's looking to find $1 billion in annual company savings to put the company, as he puts it, on a healthy path. And hundreds of workers at Heathrow Airport will strike in the run-up to the Qatar World Cup finals. Union Unite says up to 700 members of staff will walk out for 3 days from November the 18th in a dispute over pay. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Esther and Philip will be back in just a moment.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today.
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate, and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for big guests, big opinions, and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 10:38 and lots of you have been getting in touch. So we had this cabinet league table, who was in the top, who was in the middle, who was at the bottom. But we've got Carol here from Sutton Coldfield who said if there was a poll of the British people, Suella Braverman would come top. The Tory membership elected Liz Truss as PM. Say no more.
Cynthia says, I believe Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak were voted by the Conservative Party MPs because they thought the members would think Liz too weak and vote for Sunak, who they intended to be PM in the first place. That's why Liz Truss had to go. They will reap what they have sown.
And Jackie says, I'm a pensioner, so cannot afford to go to the World Cup football. I have been to Qatar, and I believe it to be a fantastic place to visit and found respect and dignity to visitors. So I wish them all the very best in the tournament. Thank you.
Victor doesn't agree with Jackie. Victor says, are you listening to and actually believing that liar? You are all beyond belief. I will not be watching a single minute of this fraud football, and I am a fan.
Oh, well, I've got Philip from Bourne said this. Regarding the FIFA World Cup, what does it mean for people like me that have no interest in sport? It means substandard programmes to watch a load of boring people going on about human rights instead of going to Qatar and protesting there. Yeah, protesting at home rather than protesting there. And programmes taken off just to show football and boring presenters repeating themselves. So it looks like a very boring time for poor Philip there. Got every point of view coming in there.
Watch GB News, Philip. That's the solution to your problem.
Yeah, certainly is. Right, well, it wasn't long ago that feminism was a united movement resisting the patriarchal systems of old. Now disputes between factions of feminists take up as much time as the fight for women's liberation.
Join us now to talk about what feminism is in 2022 and what the future of the movement entails is the feminist writer Julie Bindel and the author of upcoming book Feminism Against Progress, Mary Harrington. Mary, I'm going to start with you, if I might, because I was intrigued by the title of your book, Feminism Against Progress, and I saw that you had described yourself as a reactionary feminist, and I just wondered what both of those things meant.
Well, the book is the culmination of 10 years spent trying to answer the question, is it possible to be a feminist if you don't believe in progress? Because I don't really think progress is a thing. Or at least if you're going to claim that we're making progress, you have to define in what terms. In which case, you've already assumed the existence of what you're setting out to prove, if that makes sense. So I don't really believe progress is a thing. And my thesis is that actually what we're looking at when we look at the women's movement is women's particular specific response to the industrial era and the way the onward march of technological advancements have transformed women's lives, have transformed family life, have transformed really how we live together as men and women in the world. And in many ways, they've made us a lot freer. Technology has made life a great deal freer for a great many people, but it's not been without costs. So when I call myself a reactionary feminist, really I'm arguing that we've come out the other end of the industrial era and we're somewhere new now. We're into what I call the cyborg era, which is to say it's the age of biotech and digital computing, artificial intelligence and computers and the digital revolution, the internet and so on. And really under those circumstances, what women's interests look like have transformed again. And what we pursued all the way through the industrial era, which was really more freedom and underwritten by technology, a great deal of that is now turning against women's interests. For example, in the commodification of the commercialisation of surrogacy in the fertility industry, which I know is something that Julie has done a great deal of work campaigning against, which I admire immensely.
Julie,
so really, my argument is just that we're somewhere new, and we need to adapt.
Let's bring Julie in. Julie, look, I'm a bit puzzled by feminism and these modern feminism. I mean, look, my great grandma was a suffragette. My grandma was called Sylvia after Sylvia Pankhurst. I always thought that feminists used to believe in equality and having, you know, women were discriminated against. They wanted to be equal. Now what I see is that women want equality, but only when it suits. They want the advantages where they have an advantage, like the criminal justice system, where they're treated less harshly than men. But they want equality, but only when it suits. Is that a fair analysis?
No, that's not feminism. And I mean, too much equality, which is what I hear from men and anti-feminists all the time, is an oxymoron. But what actual feminists are fighting for is liberation, not equality, because we don't want to be equal to men in order to be able to exploit women in brothels, puke up in the streets on a Friday night, go back and bash our partners. We actually want liberation from the structures that oppress us, which means that we've got to tackle head-on male violence and the threat of male violence. And this is something that unites women all over the world. And the feminism I'm involved in, look, we're a movement, we're not a cult. We allow for differences of opinion. But we also are a social movement that has the right to define what we are. We have to have a set of aims and objectives. You can't have Margaret Thatcher and Beyonce demanding to be referred to as feminists when actually they're anything but. So feminism for me means that we have to tackle the thing that affects women globally, which is male violence. And because we don't believe that boy babies are born programmed to harm women, we therefore are very optimistic. In fact, feminists are men's best friends, because what we say is, you know, this is not necessary. Your behaviour towards women, if you choose to be violent and abusive, sexist and oppressive, is not natural, it's not innate, and you should...
Julie, I'd sort of say, if anybody had ever asked me, I guess I would have said, in a way, I'm a feminist, but I would have said, insofar as I guess I'd want independence so that I can do a job, I can go out and earn my own wage, I can do my own thing. But I also believe in choice, so I wouldn't say I was a divisive feminist. I don't see men as the enemy. I'd say I've got a choice, and this is the path I've chosen to. But it seems to me, are you on a different path now on feminism? Have we gone past that sort of, you know, take control of your own life and hand for independence? Now we're fighting what men as aggressors and being violent to women. Isn't that just a small percentage of men, not the whole of mankind?
No, absolutely it's not all men, which is, you know, a meme that actually does make me laugh every time I see it, because as soon as you start talking about male violence, you get someone saying, but not all men. Of course not all men. But the reason why we've got single-sex services, for example, the reason why we have women's prisons, women's hospital wards, all that are under threat at the moment, that we have women's changing rooms, is because enough of a minority of men, a large minority of men, do actually commit these acts of violence. We're not talking about masked marauders with knives climbing in through bedroom windows.
Be involved with just the criminal and the justice system rather than...
Can I just pick you up on something, though, Judy, on about this? According to the government's own figures, in terms of levels of domestic abuse, the highest level of domestic abuse on women is from other women in lesbian relationships.
I'm afraid that's not true.
Well, it's the government official figures. It's double.
It's not.
Well, Julie, they're the official. They might not be convenient figures, but they are the official figures.
Please invite me back any time, as soon as we've both had a look at these official figures, so I can unpick them for you. This is a myth that's going around.
It's not a myth. They are the official figures.
I'll tell you how we work out how domestic violence plays out. The bodies in the morgues. There's one woman killed every 3 days by a violent former or current ex-partner.
So you're just talking about murder? You're just talking about... You're not talking about other forms of domestic violence?
I haven't finished. If you look at the figures in A&E, if you look at the fact that the health consequences for women of domestic violence in heterosexual relationships are huge. In fact, it's the biggest health crisis globally, than cancer, than road accidents, than other serious conditions and illnesses. This idea
I think that's a bold statement, bigger than cancer and various other things. So I find that hard to be.
But this is the World Health
Organization. But if we're going to move forward and
figures.
say, but where does, and this is what I'm interested in, where does feminism go from here? Because I'm speaking to young girls and they're saying, look, we want a bit more of the ability to have a traditional life now. They're talking more, whereas I would have been going for glass ceiling, smashing through, going through, doing whatever. They're saying, no, we actually want to look at the family now. We want to actually be part of that traditional family, the family unit, and not the sort of independence of women. Should I bring in Mary there? Where is it going next, Mary?
Well, I would say building on what Julie's been saying, I mean, I agree that throughout the industrial era, it's been about liberation, and that's been good and right under that context. However, I think Julie and I, although we might disagree on some points, we would both agree that we're at a point now in the women's movement where actually what we need to be doing is setting some boundaries. And we're up against a lot of people who do not want us to set boundaries, for example.
Boundaries against who and for what? What are these boundaries against who and what?
So the short answer, the answer to your question of where I think the future of feminism is going is it's mothers and lesbians, because those are the two subgroups of women with the strongest interest in setting some boundaries. In the case of lesbians, it's on who counts as a lesbian. Whether that includes whether it's possible for a lesbian to have a penis, which I think is a
so where were the boundaries and who is it against then? Going back to your point.
Well, in both cases, it's about setting some boundaries on where men have access and what. And Julie and I might disagree on why, but I think we would both agree that there are some contexts in which it's appropriate to set limits on who can be included in the group women.
Julie,
so it's the definition of women now we're talking about. It's the definition of women.
Who would have ever thought it?
Well, indeed.
We've moved on from freedom to needing to set boundaries.
One other thing I always found about feminists is that I always thought it was about saying to women, you can do whatever you want to do. Whatever you want to do, you can do it. Don't let anyone ever tell you that you can't. But, of course, what we've found with what I would call modern-day feminism is that no longer applies, because if a woman wants to be a Formula One grid girl, it's, well, you can't do that because we don't approve of that. If you want to be a page 3 girl, you can't do that because we don't approve. You can only do what we feminists deem is a suitable thing for
If only we had that much power. And no, feminism's never been about just saying that women should be scaffolders. And with this kind of army, That's
a relief.
Or if you want to be a full-time mother, that's frowned upon, and things like that.
Feminists do not prescribe what women can and can't do. Unfortunately, patriarchy, men, and the powers that be define that. Look, you can only have choice, free choice, open choice, if there is an alternative. So when we talk, for example, about women in prostitution choosing to do it, well, where's the alternative for her? What was the choice when she had a violent pimp or she was desperately poor and needed to feed her kids and there were plenty of men willing to buy her?
But
choice
I get
has
all
to
that.
have an alternative.
And I get all that. And that is then about a society that, that you can fall back on, which is the safety net and the support. I get all that. But I'm going back to Mary's point, which was, it's about, whereas before it was a sort of march of freedoms, now it's about setting boundaries. And I'm interested in that. Where are we going? It's not about our freedoms anymore. It's setting boundaries to what?
But it is about
And
our
who?
freedom, because if, for example, you look at the disenfranchised group of women in our prisons right now, most women in those prisons are there either as a direct or indirect result of men's violence in their childhood, in their adult life, and these are very vulnerable women. Where's their freedom to live a life free of violence when you have a trans-identified male convicted rapist on the prison wing? Where is my freedom when I have to think twice about walking through particular dark places at night or getting into a taxi on my own if I've been drinking?
Okay, so these are the setting the boundaries in a way that we've moved on and going back, and maybe the final
It's
word
always been
to
that
Mary,
case.
because we haven't got much time. That is what you're talking about, Mary, on the setting of the boundaries now. It's the people going into the sort of female women's space. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, it's much more well-read people than me have made the point that absolute freedom for everybody is freedom for the wolf, but it's tyranny for the lamb, which, to put it slightly more plainly, if you're vulnerable, everybody being able to do exactly as they please is not really in your interests. We need some constraints, we need some structures, we need some social order. Otherwise, it's not possible to be free if you have any kind of vulnerability whatsoever. And that includes having the care of dependent children. That includes being physically less strong and athletic, as women normatively are. Any number of factors which could affect how able you are to exercise power over other people. Your freedom will be limited by other more stronger, more aggressive, more violent people's total freedom. So I think if there's a case within feminism for setting boundaries, it's really you can say that that's about restraint or constraint, but as Julie says, you could also say that it's about increasing the dividend of freedom for people who otherwise wouldn't have access to any at all.
Mary Harrington, thank you very much indeed. Julie Bindell, thank you very much indeed. But I am intrigued about this now, the way it has moved on, the way the freedoms and the boundaries being set, and even the definition of the word woman could be the new forefront, as it were, for feminism.
I'm determined we're going to get Julie back in to continue our debate about, particularly about the criminal justice system.
Okay.
At some point in the future.
Because, we'll do that. We'll do that,
I
Julie.
think it's very difficult to be a feminist and then not ask women to take responsibility for the crimes that they've committed and sort of give excuses for them. To me, I don't see how you can be a feminist.
You can't do that, because if you're saying everybody's got to be treated the same, then everybody is held to the same in the responsibilities.
Absolutely.
And if you commit a crime, I get all of that.
I don't always agree with Julie, but I'm a big fan of hers.
We need your views on this, because I think this path of feminism and what is the next fight, what is the next frontier for women, is intriguing stuff. So don't forget, email us, gbviews@gbnews.uk. But now we're joined by sports broadcaster Chris McCarthy to take us through the weekend's biggest sports stories.
Chris, welcome. I'll tell you what I wanted to talk
to you about. Are you a feminist?
Well, I'm more into my sports more than anything else. And this week,
that was a hospital pass there.
Yeah, this has been this has been a great week of sports, isn't it? Champions League coming to a close until next year. Now group stage is coming to a close. Likewise for Europa League as well.
And all the English teams topping the groups.
Yeah, English teams did absolutely fantastic, didn't they? All going through pretty cleanly, particularly last night as well. West Ham had a really good result. Arsenal doing very well as well. Man U, unfortunately for them, they're going to have to play another tough game, it seems, because they're going to have to play one of those teams that finished third in the Champions League group stages now. So we could see them coming up against the likes of Barcelona or Juventus, so maybe even Ajax as well. So, yeah, that's going to be a tough game for them.
But unfortunately, the Scottish teams are out.
Yeah. Sadly, it wasn't a good week for them at all, particularly Rangers. They've set a record now for the worst run in Champions League. They're, of course, 6 games they played, lost all of them. They scored 2 goals but conceded 22, leaves them with a goal difference of 20, and that is come to a worst. The worst before that was set by Dinamo Zagreb, which was minus 19 goals back in 2011-2012, but unfortunately Rangers went and topped that. They did score right at the end. They missed an open goal, then went and scored a penalty.
It's not the kind of
they went and scored a penalty, but then 60 seconds later, unfortunately, they conceded.
But your favourite topic, Formula One.
Yes, I wanted to speak to you about Formula One because, of course, there's all this controversy about Red Bull breaking the cost cap last year when, obviously, Verstappen just pipped Hamilton to the title. But they overspent. And it seems that you can just pay a fine, take it on the chin, and there's no other repercussions. Is this scandal going to run and run, do you think?
I think it's come to a close now. I think the sport wants to put it behind them, and Red Bull wants to put it behind them now. They've received not only a $7 million fine, but also they now have 10% less aerodynamic time, basically 10% less time in the wind tunnel, which is going to be about 22 runs in the wind tunnel going forward. And that's a huge loss for them. Christian Horner, team principal, reckons that's going to cost them up to around half a second in lap time, which could drop them into the mid-pack going, not into next season, I think more into 2024 is when that's going to be a big run. In the end, they only overspent by 0.3%. The cost cap was 145 million. It came came to an end that actually they only overspent by 432,000. So for 0.3%, a 10%.
That was a lot of highly paid accountants making sure they were getting those numbers down. I'm quite
Yeah,
sure.
well, it's the first year. It's the first year that this has come in, so it was something that all the teams had to go and get used to, and. Yeah, a lot of the teams all managed to...
But there's no point having rules if you can break them, basically, isn't it? And then it seems unfair for the other team who could have won.
Lots of people feel that Hamilton was robbed last year.
Yes, I'm one of those people, by the way.
Just in the last race. But, of course, this will just add to the fact that he was
robbed.
So that's why some team principals feel that, maybe there should have been, other penalties,
Hamilton's
or fans in particular.
Not bothered about the wind tunnel, I just want the title.
I think that would have been a bit of a too harsh a penalty to go and take the title away, not only for them, but for the sport as well. In the end, basically, the FIA found that all it was things went in the wrong places when they filled out all the accounts that had to be submitted for this cost cap. Things just went in the wrong places. Red Bull actually thought they were £3 million under, when in fact they were 1.8 million over. In the end, the FIA said, actually, you were owed a 1.4 million tax rebate. That brought it down to 432,000. So it was, I think, a bit of a mixture of opinion, and that's why they had to have this discussion with the FIA to resolve it. So the FIA said there was no sort of ill will here. It was just they got it wrong,
On something completely different, the WAGs, aren't they? They've got £1 billion cruise line, haven't they, to go to the World Cups, and they'll be staying on there. Any thought on that?
So let's try and sneak on.
So I just thought, what was this all about? This sort of big cruise liner for the WAGs. Obviously, the footballers can't come on, their husbands can't come on, just them.
Well, that doesn't sound bad, does it? Doesn't sound like a bad way to go.
Exactly. I'm thinking about bursting in. And I should just say as well, because I love horse racing, it's the Breeders' Cup, big meeting in America tonight where the best of the Europeans take on the best of the Americans, 2 days of racing at Keeneland. So you must tune in for that tonight, Chris.
Oh, well. Any tips?
No, you won't want that.
Yeah, no, you certainly wouldn't. I'm more of a Liam Hamilton
Keep your
fan.
money in your pocket would be my tip. But enjoy. It's a great spectacle, and hopefully the British trained horses can beat the Americans.
But we've got another great hour coming up, so don't go anywhere.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV.
On radio.
and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's
news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain. I'm not afraid to give you a platform and say it how it is.
Come on, make the case. Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show.
God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world.
Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Hello, hello, hello. Good morning and welcome back to Friday Morning with Esther and Phil.
This hour we'll be discussing how the Iceland supermarket chain are helping people during the cost of living crisis. We'll also be joined by an auctioneer who recently sold 122-year-old chocolates, if you fancy those.
And keep those views coming in. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. But now it's time for the latest news headlines with Rhiannon.
Good morning, it's 1 minute past 11, your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The government's under increasing pressure to balance the books after the Bank of England warns the UK is facing the longest recession in a century. The Chancellor's reportedly looking at raising capital gains tax, which is imposed on the sale of assets, as well as dividend tax to address the £50 billion black hole in public finances. The Sizewell C nuclear power plant in Suffolk is also under review as part of spending cuts. The new site was part of Boris Johnson's final policy speech as he sought to make energy security part of his legacy as Prime Minister. Critics have argued it'll be expensive and take years to build. The HS2 high-speed rail line in the north of England and other major projects are also being assessed. The Northern Ireland Secretary has confirmed there will be no Stormont Assembly election before Christmas. Chris Heaton-Harris says he'll make a statement on the next steps in Parliament next week. Sinn Féin says the decision should have been made a week ago and described the delay as an example of classic Tory chaos. The devolved government hasn't functioned since February. Scotland's First Minister says she regrets delays in the delivery of 2 ferries, which are both late and over budget. The vessels are due to be delivered next year and early in 2024 at a potential cost of more than £300 million, 3 times the initial contract. Nicola Sturgeon's given evidence before a committee of MSPs investigating the construction. After Audit Scotland said there have been a multitude of failings.
Obviously, this is still a live project, regrettably so, and the Scottish Government remains absolutely committed to delivering both ferries and supporting our island communities that rely so heavily on vessels of this type on a daily basis.
Primary school kids running drugs for gangs has become the norm. That's the warning from the former Children's Commissioner. A report by the Commission on Young Lives warns of a crisis putting hundreds of thousands of children in England at risk of violence. It says a combination of COVID and the cost of living crisis makes it easier for children to be exploited. Elsewhere, Donald Trump has dropped one of his strongest hints yet that he may run for the White House again.
In order to make our country successful and safe and glorious, I will very, very, very probably do it again, okay? Very, very, very probably.
Quite a big hint there. Speaking to a crowd in Iowa, the former US president teased a strong possibility of a comeback. It's the first of 4 rallies in 5 days for the Republican as he campaigns for candidates in next week's midterm elections. Meanwhile, US President Joe Biden will be rallying with former President Barack Obama on Saturday in Pennsylvania. Twitter will lay off employees today. It follows a week of uncertainty surrounding the company's future. Elon Musk fired the chief executive and top finance and legal executives when he took over Twitter last week. He's looking to find $1 billion in annual company savings to put the company, as he puts it, on a healthy path. Hundreds of workers at Heathrow Airport will strike in the run-up to the World Cup finals in Qatar. Union Unite says 700 members of staff working in ground handling, airside transport and cargo will walk out in a dispute over pay. They'll walk out for 3 days from November the 18th. Fans travelling to Qatar for the World Cup may well be affected. A patient who's had COVID for 411 days has now tested negative. Doctors say thanks to a cocktail of drugs, the 59-year-old has now been cured. The man has a weakened immune system following a kidney transplant and is thought to be one of the longest living patients with a persistent COVID infection. And the King will host a reception at Buckingham Palace for business figures and NGOs ahead of the UN Climate Change Summit COP27. King Charles will have more than 200 guests from across the globe. The Prime Minister will be among them after his U-turn on attending the summit. This is GB News. We're bringing more as it happens now, though. It's back to Esther and Philip.
Thank you, Rhiannon. Lots of you have been getting in touch. Esther, what have you got?
David says the sooner certain people realise that this is a football competition and not an LGBT convention, the better. That was, we were speaking to the Qatari Ambassador earlier on, about the World Cup.
And on that front, Peter says, Qatar has its own laws. Why do woke worshippers believe they can impose different views? Qatar does not need to become woke. The UK needs to stop the elite manipulators brainwashing the massive majority of normal people. Good luck to Qatar. They have a bright future.
And Christopher says, because we were talking about the migrant situation, think how much worse it would be if we were still in the EU with free movement.
Lots of support for Suella Braverman. For example, Joan says, the words Suella Braverman used are true. We have been invaded and our country is not our own anymore. It's time politicians remembered what the people want and not what they want. Expect an exodus of Tory voters joining the Reform Party.
And Linda from Leeds says the British people are being scammed at the Channel. We're in a cost of living crisis and the British people are paying taxes for illegal immigrants. We're being invaded and taken for a ride. We need to close loopholes in the laws for immigration. All the do-gooders are destroying this country. If you're British, get nothing, only tax rises to pay for illegal immigrants. Where's it going to end, Linda, there?
And Sue says, sadly, Phil, not everyone is angry or even disturbed by the invasion of illegal immigrants. Most shocking, and especially, it seems, in the Conservative Party.
Well, I'm going to bring in now our commentator, political commentator for this hour, Jonathan Gibson, and talk about this, because you can tell the anger in the public now about the illegal immigrants, those coming over from, France on the dinghy there. Has the political class lost touch with the needs of the people?
Absolutely, and I don't think it's a new phenomenon, them losing touch with the people. I think it's been a long time coming. And I think it's not even just restricted to the UK, to be honest. Across Europe and across America as well, we've seen there's been a growing disconnect between these people who are sort of the elite, liberal elite, and then the masses. And it's really, really worrying in a sense, because that's what's leading to the growth of these unexpected candidacies of support for example, Brexit or Trump or Marine Le Pen or Geert Wilders, or over here you said the growing movement of Reform UK. And, there's clearly this disconnect which is not being accounted for. The politicians are not listening to the people, and I think now is a really big sparking point when we've suddenly got this new wave of illegal immigration coming into our country to discuss this and to energise conversation around it.
Is it just that, though? I've got to say, it seems to me that the Home Secretary is very exercised about it in the same way that the public are. It's not that politicians aren't angry about it. We're angry about it. We're politicians, and lots of our colleagues are. It's what we seem short of is actually knowing what the solution to the problem is. That's the issue. It's not everyone can be angry about the problem, but what we seem to be lacking is solutions.
So on two fronts there, I'll probably push back slightly on the front that politicians hold the same views as the people, because among a lot of studies, they've shown that people, for example, who are university educated, people who, for example, have a certain economic background or a certain age, have very different views to others or from different parts of the countries. And in terms of your point about the Home Secretary and its role, I think you're completely right. I think they aren't doing enough, and I think that they're isn't an obvious political solution. I've got some personal thoughts as to ways of tackling it, but at the moment, as we saw, only 4%, I think it was, of immigrants were getting processed in the asylum centres, and it's simply not working. It's simply broken the system at the moment.
I wonder too, and I read the comment out from Linda in Leeds, basically, here we are, we're going to have tax rises, we're in a cost of living crisis, we're going to feel the pain if it is a long drawn-out recession, and yet what we're seeing is people coming over and going into what would be four-star hotels, having everything paid for. Could that be the flashpoint where the public is listened more to, or the flashpoint where they think they're going to have to do something. Because what I'm seeing, it seems that the Manston Centre, they just seem to have been letting people out. They're not processing them there. They're getting the numbers down from 4,000 to 2,000, but not because they've processed anybody. If you're to read all the reports, they're just leaving them at sort of either Victoria Station or telling people to collect them from sort of who they might know in the local community. That is not working. That is deception of numbers.
Yeah, clearly it's not working. Clearly the processing is not working. And I think people really feel like the government are prioritising these people over themselves. You know, I think they feel, in a sense, left behind. And I think that's a feeling that's really, really visceral right now, and something that we need to change or need to adapt, need to find a solution to.
Jonathan, we'll come back to you a little bit later on.
Now, Iceland Foods has announced its public support for the Feed the Future campaign, being coordinated by the Food Foundation, which calls for all children from families on universal credit to immediately become eligible for free school meals.
Richard Walker, the managing director of Iceland Foods, said as the cost of living crisis continues to worsen, families are increasingly concerned about keeping food on the table. By widening the criteria for free school meals eligibility, we can relieve the burden of stress that so many parents are experiencing.
Oh, delighted to say that Richard joins us now. Richard, thank you for giving up your time to speak to us this morning. Just on this campaign, I mean, obviously we're reading in all the papers about how the government's got to live within its means, it's going to have to cut spending, it's going to have to scale things back. Is it really wise to say that nobody who receives any universal credit can afford to feed their own children?
Well, look, we're a barometer of Britain, I guess, because we've got 1,000 stores on every high street serving 5 million customers. Many of those are really struggling. And what we're seeing, what we're hearing from our colleagues, from our customers, is that things are getting much, much tougher. I think as a return on investment, it's a fantastic thing to invest in our kids, and if those kids are going hungry in school, unable to concentrate, you know, that in turn will have knock-on consequences. I can't think of any better investment than actually making sure our kids are engaged at school, happy, healthy, and not going hungry.
Richard, I mean, you know, picking up on Philip's point there, it does go to a much, much bigger question. So we've already got 1.9 million children entitled to free school meals. That's 22.5% of children, and it also includes your year 1 and 2. So is this now an extension of the role of the state, that they're going to be in charge of more children and feeding children than ever before? Is that sort of the journey that you're on?
Look, I think we need to take a step back and realise the severity of the cost of living crisis that we're already in, but also how tough things are going to get into winter. So we've got fuel inflation, we've got heating energy inflation, and we've got food inflation, which I know only too well about. We're seeing the prices of food go up at shelf, and actually there's much worse to come. There are cost price increases at the moment from suppliers that we haven't even stomached as a business, let alone inevitably have to pass some of that on to our customers. So we can see all of these staples going up. Now, of course, there's going to be rising interest rates and therefore knock-on consequences to mortgages. So I just think times are really, really tough. And if the government can't support the most vulnerable during this moment, then I wonder where some of their other priorities are. And I just think this would be a really good investment. Obviously, Rishi has rightly made education a key kind of North Star of his government, and this for me forms a big part of it.
Yeah, and I think, you know, you're absolutely right. It's going to be difficult for people for all of the reasons you've said, whether it's people's mortgage, whether it's food going up, whether it's energy going up. I just wonder, where is the best bit then of government intervention in maybe the fuel, maybe into other things, but taking responsibility of children. You might say there are other ways to do it rather than sort of going that way forward, and there could be another way to do it. But I want to look, because you spot on, you do know about food inflation. What are the, I don't know, the best things to buy at the moment if you were to go there, if you wanted to feed a family of 4 in your shop? What are the best things and what are the things to stay away from?
Well, look, we are a value-orientated food retailer, so we try and sell the best quality food at the cheapest prices. We're seeing our luxury ranges do very well now because people are trading down from more expensive supermarkets, and that's an entry price point for them. So that's interesting. But also we've committed at the other end of the spectrum to holding the price of our £1 ready meal lines at least to the end of this year. But we've actually introduced over 50 new £1 lines as well. We even earlier this week had a 1p sale of certain ready meals online. So we're trying to do whatever we can, whether that's £10 off 30 vouchers or giving away £30 vouchers to the most vulnerable pensioners in need. Giving a discount of 10% to anyone over the age of 60 every Tuesday has proved wildly popular for millions of people. And I think you're right, it's not all on government to solve these problems. People have to take individual responsibility and accountability, but also the private sector needs to do what they can. And I think particularly our business, considering the demographics we serve, the customers we have, it's incumbent on us to do what we can through a range of initiatives.
And you probably have got the ability to help other people, because at the time, I think it was the business rate relief that other shops gave back, whether it was Lidl, whether it was Aldi, whether it was Tesco, Asda, or what have you. Iceland didn't at the time. So you've got, as it might be, a surplus where you can help people.
Well, we lost profit last year and we will do this year. I know there was a lot of heat at the time, maybe even including from yourself, Esther.
I ran the campaign and we got $2 billion back from every other shops, but you chose not to hand back your $40 million.
No, we kept hold of it, and actually I hope we've been vindicated in doing so. Since then we had a third lockdown, we've had a war in Ukraine, now we've got a cost of living crisis. We're not profiteering. Our profits didn't go up, they went backwards and are now negative. So this is about securing the best possible outcome for 5 million customers. But also, I've got 30,000 colleagues that rely on us for a paycheck every week. We didn't put a single person on furlough, which kind of amounts to the same thing, taking government money to prop up your business. So we invested in our business, we've created jobs, we've kept ourselves stable, and we've come out of it the other side. And, Lord knows, we've certainly got a lot of challenges ahead. Interestingly, when the second round of rate relief was offered to us, we declined it because we didn't need it.
Richard Walker, thank you very much for joining us, and I'm sure our viewers will want you to make sure you keep those prices as low as possible. So thank you very much for that.
Now, in news that we'll look at as a shock to many, that there is, and we've got it here, no bounties in chocolate tubs anymore. You can't get them. I think that's a shocker. But anyway.
I think it's a cracking idea because I can't stand them.
Well, it was meant to be, wasn't it, that 40% of people didn't want them, 60% do, and so we'd want to...
I'm in the 40%, so well done, Tesco's, I think, have started that.
The Mail's come out today and said, actually, it's wrong. We do want the bounties. It's the Milky Ways we don't want.
Just thought I'd say. People's opinion about whether there should be bounties in boxes of celebrations. But chocolate manufacturers Mars Wrigley said that around 40% of the public hated the coconut-flavoured treat, of which I'm in that. But it's marketed as a slice of paradise.
Yeah, and it is.
Bizarrely.
Anyway, it's got us thinking about other tasty treats taken out of commission, including a 122-year-old chocolate bar or tub of chocolate, which was recently found in an attic and sold at an auction for around £500.
Joining us now is the man who sold the Victorian chocolate, auctioneer Paul Cooper. Paul, thank you for joining us. It seems bizarre to me that you'd find a 122-year-old chocolate and think, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to auction that off. Why on earth does it have any value at all? It seems the last thing I'd be sending to an auctioneer.
Good morning. Well, I suppose it's a slice of social history and a slice of military history as well.
Well, it's a slice of something. I'm not sure. It's a slice of chocolate.
So tell us about the story of this sort of chocolate and the chocolates inside in the chocolate box. What is the story behind it?
Yeah, if we rewind to 2018, we were approached by a local vendor who had some World War I medals from a chap called Richard Bullymore, who, amongst other things, had won the Distinguished Conduct Medal. So he was a bit of a war hero. And along with his medals, his military history, some photographs and letters, there was a tin of chocolate that had been sent by Princess Mary to the troops at the front in World War I. We sold that collection for nearly £4,000. And the next day, a lady rang me from North London and said, you think World War I chocolate's impressive? Well, I've just put a tin of Boer War chocolate in the post to you that I've had in my collection. Will you sell it for me? And we did. So we sold that one. And it was a very interesting story when we did the research. It turned out that Queen Victoria decided that she wanted to send the chocolate to the troops at the front. But the chocolate companies, where people like Fry's and Cadbury's and Rowntree's are all Quakers, pacifists. They didn't want to be seen to profit from the war. So therefore they said no. So the Queen, who famously was not amused, asked them to think again. So then they agreed to donate the chocolate free of charge, so they couldn't be seen to be making a profit from it. But the deal was that they weren't prepared to brand the chocolate or brand the tins that it came in. And the tins, in actual fact, come up quite commonly at auction. They're fairly standard bits of auction memorabilia. The Queen, again, unhappy because she wanted the boys to know that they were getting the finest British chocolate. So they relented, and some of them had the names stamped in the front. Fast forward to this year, a couple in Immingham, not far from me, clearing a loft out, and they find a tin of what they thought was boot polish because it's got blocks of brown something or other in it. But on inspection, they saw it was Rowntree's. They Googled it, I came up, and they rang me. I'm only 25 minutes away, and they brought it in, and we sold it at auction for several £100s, which I think, from my research, is probably a world record price.
Well, I have to say that is an incredibly interesting story. Just quickly, was there any difference in the chocolates? Do you know what chocolate types it was? We're all talking about whether you can have a Bounty in a bar or not. What actually was the chocolate, or was it just plain chocolate?
It was just milk chocolate, as I understand it. It's a peculiar colour now, and I'm told that you could eat it if you wanted to, but it would probably be quite a challenging experience.
But it would put you in hospital. But anyway, you wouldn't want to do that.
Paul Cooper, thank you very much for joining us. I've got to say, you are obviously brilliant at your job. You've got a bar of chocolate that was given for nothing, and you've managed to sell it for £440 or whatever. I think that's the sign of a cracking auctioneer, so well done on getting such a good price for a 122-year-old bar of chocolate. Never thought it would happen myself.
Well, I'm loving the story. That is a bit of history. He sells not chocolate, it's a bit of history.
He did a great job with that. Anyway, coming up, we'll be joined by a journalist to discuss the ongoing cost of COVID lockdowns. So don't go anywhere.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own news from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
Welcome back. It's 11:26. Now, everyone's concerned about the economic problems facing the country and also being faced around the world. But what has been the cause of this turmoil?
We borrowed hundreds of billions of pounds to fund lockdowns, and as the country now faces economic turmoil, many commentators have asserted that the chickens have finally come home to roost.
Telegraph columnist Madeline Grant is one such person, and she joins us now. Madeline, thanks for joining us. It seems interesting to me. I hear lots of people blamed for the economic mess. Obviously, the government gets the blame, Liz Truss, Kwasi Kwarteng, Brexit, everything. But the people seem very reluctant to blame the COVID lockdowns. Why is that? Is that just because at the time they were very popular with the public?
I definitely think that's a big part of it. There's not so much political capital to be made about the hundreds of billions that were spent locking down the country and paying people to stay at home, because there was, almost complete unanimity in the House of Commons during that time. I remember writing about it and sometimes going in to see, and it was extraordinary, the consensus, and also the demonisation of people who did dissent from the consensus view and tried to draw attention to these facts. And I also just think that amongst the public, the amount of money that was borrowed and the sums that were being kind of, shot off in all directions, we got kind of used to this and began to think that it was normal, which now means that borrowing enormous sums, inflating the national debt, has almost become the norm. And now that clearly there are tax hikes and spending cuts are on the way, people seem almost a bit surprised by this, because I think that the total sense of irresponsibility when it came to the nation's finances, that's become the new normal. So it's almost a culture shift is required to get out of this way of thinking.
Well, you're certainly right about the demonisation. Me and Esther were two people who were demonised ourselves for pointing out the cost. I mean, as I always say, Madeline, locking down the economy for 2 years, paying people to do nothing, borrowing and printing money to pay them to do nothing. Who would have thought there might be some economic consequences from that? But do the government not have quite a bit of responsibility here? Because at the time, they didn't say to people, look, if we lock down, it might have some benefits in terms of the virus, but there is going to be an economic cost later down the line. They never said that to people. So do they not bear some responsibility for not basically giving people the full picture when they were introducing the lockdowns?
Oh, of course they do. I mean, I'm certainly not saying it's the fault solely of the public. I think that it was such an extraordinary time, and I think the politicians were generally, the people who were in charge were generally more interested in getting their policies through and keeping things together. It must have been an incredibly difficult time to be governing. I mean, to be fair to the Prime Minister, he was actually one of the members of the cabinet who was more hawkish about the economy and was trying to raise the alarm, although of course clearly did not have all that much success at reining it in. But in general, there was a real problem, a political and a cultural problem, where people asking questions and expressing doubts about whether this was the right way to go, whether not just the first lockdown when we knew so little, but was it wise to lock down for so long and repeatedly do so? Just asking these kind of questions meant, often being demonised and accused of acting in very bad faith indeed. Many of my colleagues at the Telegraph were called, accused of sort of not giving a damn about, people dying, and the most grotesque arguments were used. It was just a very, very bad time for any kind of questioning and debate.
Yeah, and as sort of the political class now has collective amnesia because everybody was locking down and Labour would have been like harder and longer, does it look like they're seizing upon anybody to blame? So let's get this right. It was 400 billion that was spent during COVID, but now it seems Liz Truss needs to be the pantomime villain who they're blaming. Yes, it was a terrible mini budget that she did, but most of that's been reversed. That was 50 billion. But that is the person now everybody is happily wanting to blame, despite the fact it was 8 times bigger what they spent on COVID.
Well, you've put it very well, Esther, and actually it makes sense for people on both sides of the political divide to accuse Liz Truss of having been the sole culprit in all of this. It's perhaps useful for people currently in the Treasury because they can wash their hands of any culpability they may have had in the kind of fiscal period of enormous borrowing and money printing. And of course, it makes sense for the opposition because that's politics. It's since when was politics ever fair? But there is really, I've noticed, what looks like quite a concerted effort to paint all of our current economic problems as the fallout from the Liz Truss budget. And of course, given the timing of that budget, it's actually not a very difficult case to make because it really does, I think, look very causal to a lot of people. Quite reasonably, they say things really seem to turn particularly nasty and terrifying right after the budget. So that is how it appears to lots of people.
Madeline Grant, thank you very much indeed for joining us today. Hopefully see you soon. And Jonathan, I wanted to bring you in on that. Do you see now everybody's trying to pin the blame elsewhere and nobody wants to take responsibility for the overspend of 400 billion?
Look, I campaigned quite heavily, I'd say almost, in favour of Rishi Sunak over Liz Truss. But I can completely recognise that it's not her fault, this economic crisis alone, There are lots of different factors at play. The 400 billion COVID spent, the energy prices which are rising due to the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. And, these are really, really big, complex problems. You can't have a balanced national debt whilst keeping taxes low, whilst maintaining low inflation. It's just not possible, You can't solve all of these 3 things. No Prime Minister is going to be able to do this. And after Rishi Sunak, I'm sure soon, will implement his economic budget plan, there are going to be people that are going to lose out. There are going to be people that are hit really hard because it is simply an impossible job. You cannot have your cake and eat it at this time.
Jonathan, thank you for that. Coming up, we'll be joined by economics commentator Laurie Laird, who will help us make sense of the Bank of England's doom-laden predictions for the economy. But first, it's the news with Rhiannon.
Philip, thank you. It's 11:33, your top stories from the GB newsroom. The government's under increasing pressure to balance the books after the Bank of England warned the UK's facing the longest recession in a century. The Chancellor's reportedly looking at raising capital gains and dividend tax to address the £50 billion black hole in public finances. The Sizewell C nuclear power plant in Suffolk is also under review as part of spending cuts. The new site was part of Boris Johnson's final policy speech as he sought to make energy security part of his legacy as Prime Minister. Critics have argued it'll be expensive and take years to build. The HS2 high-speed rail line in the north of England and other major projects are also being assessed. The Northern Ireland Secretary has confirmed there will be no Stormont Assembly election before Christmas. Chris Heaton-Harris says he'll make a statement on the next steps in Parliament next week. Sinn Féin says the decision should have been made a week ago and described the delay as an example of classic Tory chaos. Twitter employees have been told they'll receive an email today telling them whether or not they've lost their job as part of a major shake-up. Offices have been temporarily closed and the access badges of more than 7,500 staff members suspended globally as the new boss Elon Musk works to find around £1 billion in annual savings. And Unite says Qatar Airways will be one of the airlines affected by hundreds of workers striking at Heathrow Airport in the run-up to the World Cup. The airline had extra flights scheduled during the tournament. The union says up to 700 members of staff will walk out for 3 days from November the 18th in a dispute over pay. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.1217 and €1.1439. The price of gold is £1,473 and 53 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,285 points.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 11:38. Now, the last flight will touch down at Doncaster Sheffield Airport this evening as its owners have pressed ahead with highly controversial plans to close it down.
The Peel Group said it's shutting the airport, which employs about 800 people, due to a fundamental lack of financial viability. And it began winding down the operations this week.
Let's now speak to our Yorkshire and Humber reporter, Anna Riley, who is joined by the chairman of Friends of Doncaster Sheffield Airport. So, a very sad day, one that should not be happening.
It certainly is, yes. There's been a lot of outcry here amongst locals about South Yorkshire's only airport closing. It brings in 110 million each year to the local economy and it's loved by many. I'm joined by Andrew Bosmans this morning. He is the chair of Friends of Doncaster Sheffield Airport. Just tell me about what you've been doing and your passion for the airport.
Well, I'm a local lad, born and bred. I went away to do my degree, and I worked away for a number of years. Came back to Doncaster in the late 1980s, and since the inception of the airport, right at the very, very beginning, before any of this was built, was able to galvanise support through a local group called Fly Finningley. Finningley Locals Say Yes was the other version of that, and we were able to galvanise public support to car boot sales and other events, going to events locally, fetes and galas and things like that, and to really sort of put Finningley, as it was then, RAF Finningley, on the map, and sort of put the argument out there that there should really be an international airport or an airport of some sort of description here, and it would use the excellent facilities that the RAF left behind.
And what does the airport mean to you? I know in part of your role you do meets and greets, you do a lot for the airport, don't you?
We do as an organisation. It's not just me personally. I mean, I front the organisation, FODSA, Friends of Doncaster Sheffield Airport, but we have what we call a kind of a welcome, which was noted by a lot of the customers that use this airport. We're actually the airport ambassadors, so we're usually the first port of call for people who are coming into the airport. Most people are rather nervous at coming to somewhere where perhaps they've never been before, and taking them through the whole process right from the very beginning. Welcome to the airport. Is there anything that we can help you with? And even walked very nervous passengers or late passengers through the airport right the way through to seeing them onto the plane.
So what would it mean to you, if this closure goes ahead and if this last flight is the last flight that's landing here today?
It's a very emotional time because, obviously, as I said, it's an interesting and very vibrant city that's growing in popularity and also is growing economically as well. And this is the jewel in the crown. And to see it close and the way in which it's being closed is, to me, it's a travesty. It's just very sad. Not just for me, not for FODSA as a group and for the 22 years that I've put in personally, but it's also for the good people in there that were part of that family. And it was a family, and a lot of people are saying to me, is there anything we can do now? I don't know personally. I hope there is, and I've still got hope. As long as that building is standing, I will have hope.
So, message of hope, but also of sadness of the closure of this airport.
Anna, thank you very much indeed for that. It is a sad day. I'm a born and bred from Doncaster too, and in fact, my mum was on holiday and flew back into Doncaster Sheffield Airport earlier this week, so she really will be gutted that the airport's closing. She's going to have to go further away now.
I have to tell you, I think it is a national strategic mistake to get rid of an airport like that. I mean, we won't build another airport. We are an island, so how do we get on and off our island and things on and off? It's by air and it's by port. So I think getting rid of this and whatever they're hoping to do, build more houses, but it's a mistake of giant proportions for an island to lose an airport. Think of other countries, they're building more so they can be more global and more competitive.
You'll be the toast of Doncaster.
Oh, thank you very much indeed. But anyway, Don here, we were talking about feminism before. We had a debate about feminism. Don said, you can guarantee equality of opportunity, but you cannot guarantee equality of outcome. Sweden has positive discrimination and it has historically been promoted across all fields to get girls into traditionally male-favoured professions. However, girls still prefer to choose caring or people-based professions like nursing or office work.
Andrew says, I'm a man and my ex would attack me. Men are also likely to be a victim of violence. Feminism is now about wanting more whilst keeping the benefits.
Mm-hmm. And we've got, we were talking to the Qatari Ambassador about the World Cup there. Richard says there are many countries that have laws that we don't agree with. We'd be happy to play in the USA, even though some states there still have a death penalty and are pro or anti, as some of them are now, abortion. We have to live in the rules of another country. We can't just land somewhere and think that they're going to live life according to you.
Keep those views coming in. Now, the Bank of England has warned that Britain may be facing the longest recession for 100 years, following an announcement that interest rates will be raised to 3%.
Taxpayers are facing the worst squeeze on real income since the Second World War, with analysis suggesting that the average household will be £800 poorer next year.
Joining us now is economics commentator Laurie Laird. Laurie, thank you for joining us. It seems that we're just sort of being told that there's no alternative but to sort of sleepwalk into a 2-year recession.
It's bad. It's not quite as bad as it appears. Yes, it will be quite potentially the longest recession we have ever seen, but it won't be the deepest. It won't be as extreme as what we saw during the 2008, the great financial crisis. And in fact, a couple of the Bank of England members who gave a press conference yesterday said that there's a lot of uncertainty amongst this, around this forecast. It may not be quite as bad as what we think. But I think the real thing to fixate on is the Bank of England did raise rates by a huge amount. They telegraphed this well. There was no surprise there. But the one thing that was surprising is they're saying we're getting to the top of this tightening cycle. We don't have too much further to go. And they essentially voiced the concern that this is going to be a recession and we can't continue to raise rates while the economy is slowing. So we're getting toward the end of this tightening cycle.
An interesting article today in the Eye, Paul Ward there saying, look, reform of the Bank of England, you know, everybody could be a bit to blame. We were talking about the cost of COVID, we were talking about Trussonomics, but also the bank is not beyond criticism. Too much power, hasn't really explained what it was doing, and it was behind the curve for a long period of time when really it should have been looking at the economy and where things were going.
Interesting, because the Bank of England started tightening rates well before the Federal Reserve in the U.S. did. They were a little bit slower to do it, but they were 6 months ahead of the Fed. This is an interesting one because central banks started here by saying, think back to post-pandemic, inflation's transitory. It's simply supply chains. This is the problem. Don't worry. Don't panic about this. Then it became, this is oil prices. This is energy prices. We can't affect the price of energy with interest rates. Don't panic. It'll come back down. We are now seeing central bankers say, ooh, maybe it's time for us to panic. And I think the one thing to be concerned about is a press conference that the head of the Federal Reserve gave a couple of days ago, Jerome Powell. And the Federal Reserve is sort of first amongst equals in world central banks. He said that we have very little data about inflation being this high in the modern era. That scared me. Over the summer, Jerome Powell said, I now understand how much I didn't understand about inflation. This is concerning. So we have central bankers following the old playbook, but it's not entirely clear that this playbook applies to this bout of inflation.
So we've got interest rates going up, which obviously is going to slow down the economy. We've got the Chancellor has got his autumn statement where we're being told it's going to hurt. Is the front page of the Metro. Tax rises, which will damage the economy, spending cuts, which will slow down the economy. I mean, does Jeremy Hunt have to go down this path?
I'm so glad you asked, because Rishi Sunak has really pinned himself to fiscal probity. And when he was Chancellor, I was going to say way back when, actually not that long ago, he very much talked about fiscal probity. We can't outspend, we can't live beyond our means. This is a bad time to cut spending. To go into a recession and talk about cutting spending isn't a fantastic idea. These potential increases in capital gains tax, that falls on the people who are making the most. That is the sort of tax that makes sense in this environment. But cutting spending in a recession, I'm not sure that makes a great deal of sense. We all got this primer on economics when Liz Truss was around. We all learned what bond yields were. We learned a lot more about interest rates than we knew. But bond yields are below where they were on the 23rd of September. We can still borrow for 10 years at just over 3%. It seems to me that going into a recession is a time to borrow to make sure your most vulnerable in society are taken care of.
So if I bring Jonathan in here, a political commentator, I was just hoping that Jeremy Hunt was saying everything is on the table so that when we get the financial statement, we'll go, phew, it wasn't as bad as we thought. But when you look at this, it does look like one tax rise after another, fiscal drag, bringing more people into paying tax, as you say, stopping projects. Is this a sensible move for the Tory party? Is this going to provide those clear blue, lines or blue water between the parties, which we haven't seen before?
What I think it's going to do and what I think it's going to need to do is tax those who are earning record profits, for example, BP and oil companies who are recording these record profits, because those are the only real
And they
groups
have
that are
said
able
that,
to.
and Rishi had already done that. That's already in place, but you're going to say maybe more and maybe for longer.
Yes,
these
greater
windfall
taxes need to be implemented, and I think it's really, really interesting on the back of what's just been said about borrowing. The fact that he has reduced bond yields down in terms of to a lower percentage means that we do have capabilities to borrow. And look, it's not ideal. We don't want to be borrowing tons of money when we've just borrowed, but in order to protect the most vulnerable, it might need to be done. You know, it just has to be a sacrifice that we're prepared to make.
I just think it's always the government's in an impossible position, because if it does what Liz Truss does, which is go for growth, it then has huge borrowing costs that it can't sustain. If it does what Jeremy Hunt does, then it gets criticised for taking us into a recession. I always say in politics, you're not usually choosing between a good outcome and a bad outcome. You're usually choosing between a bad outcome and a catastrophic outcome.
Yes,
and
I
it
agree.
seems to me that the government's in a no-win situation. Whichever tack it goes down, it's basically going to cause a problem.
For sure, but I think pitching the Bank of England against the government, which is what we saw under the Truss, where, you know, inflation was rising, then interest rates were rising, and then it was continuous rising until it was something like 5%, and it's now predicted to be 4.5%, which is actually lower than the forecasts earlier a few months ago, is really, really difficult.
But don't forget, as we said before with Madeline Grant, the elephant in the room that nobody's talking about or wants to take responsibility for is the 400 billion. That was the COVID lockdown costs. Just saying, just putting it out there. Give us your views.
It's now time to go through today's top showbiz and entertainment stories with Sarah Robertson, our showbiz expert. Sarah, what's been going on?
Oh, there's been a lot going on this week. Hi, guys. Yes, it's been a very busy week showbiz-wise. We've obviously now got the build-up for I'm a Celebrity starting this weekend.
There was some news on I've never heard.
Do you know what?
I'm a Celebrity. Something happening.
I don't know, but there's a couple of people going in there getting paid quite a lot. Politicians,
Yes.
I haven't read anything
singers,
about
go on.
Well,
anything about that.
Well, Boy George has made a bit of a gaffe already before going in, because he says he's going to be the first queen of the jungle. And he said, oh, it's about time that a gay man won, completely forgetting that 15 years ago, Christopher Biggins in 2007
obviously
was
friend,
the first.
friend of our station
Yes,
as well.
Yeah, queen of the jungle. So,
But I didn't realise the money was that big. Now that we find out that Matt Hancock is getting 400,000, then we
correct.
find Boy George is on 500,000.
He's the highest ever paid, though, is Boy George. So he's obviously got a very good agent who's skilled at negotiations. But he says he's not going to get involved in squabbles in the camp. He's going to take himself away and do meditation and yoga. And this is a new Boy George.
He might find his fees halved if he does that.
Well, this is it. But I think, no. We've got Matt Hancock coming in. Come on, Boy George, you can't let us down. I want a Boy George vitriolic outburst at Matt Hancock. I want him to really go for it.
I don't think Matt Hancock could hear any more in the camp that he wouldn't have read in all of the papers. I mean, really? Was it worth him going in?
Well, he's obviously very fame-hungry and must have something that he wants to promote. And also 400,000 is a lot of money.
He has got a book.
Exactly. I mean, I'm not sure which weirdos are going to buy that, but, you know, there we are.
Is he going to add to the viewing? Is Matt Hancock going to add to the viewing figures, do you think?
I think definitely, because people will want to tune in order to vote for him to do all of the trials. And there's going to be some really nasty trials this year. So people are going to want to see Matt Hancock, you know, in a coffin with rats running all over him.
I did actually write in the Express today, could he be, by the end, Matt Hancock, rather than the sort of villain and sort of person of hatred now, but actually a national treasure, as we get all get our anger out, as he does every Bush Tucker trial, and he has to do it and we can watch him cheer.
I think you're drinking the Kool-Aid, Esther, I'm afraid. Maybe that's what Matt Hancock thinks is going to happen, and that's what he's told himself.
But it will unite like no other politician has ever managed to do before. He will have 100% unification, all voting for him to do those trials.
Yes, out of hatred and anger and people just being sickened of what he put the country through for 2 years with his lockdowns. But so moving on from I'm a Celebrity, now there's been some carnage going on with Strictly Come Dancing. I created a bit of a storm on Saturday because I revealed that Craig Revel-Horwood had called Motzi a diva, and Motzi hit back on the show live, so that was me to blame for that, sorry.
Trouble causer. Well, we knew that, trouble causer.
But secondly, there's been more controversy with Strictly Come Dancing because Kim Marsh suffered a major panic attack during rehearsals when she was practising the quick step. she suffers apparently from terrible anxiety and was hyperventilating and had to come out of rehearsals, and there was real fear that she wasn't going to be able to perform on the show. So I think strictly this year there's a lot going on with the contestants there, and just worries about how they are, and they've just had a bit of hiccups this year with what's going on with the show. And then lastly, we have our lovely Prince of Wales, Prince William, who is reversing how royal visits are going to be done. So this is a big reveal that the Telegraph had today. Prince William's just been to Scarborough. He's just opened, helped with a new community centre, had a visit there with Kate Middleton, the Princess of Wales, where they've donated £345,000 to this community centre, which is helping mental health. But this is a start of the new way that the royals are going to be doing their visits. They're basically reversing it, and what they're going to be doing is announcing the sponsorship that they've raised and the money that is going into foundations and places that they're going to be visiting when they get there. So it's quite a nice thing that they're doing. And this is something that Prince William has apparently had in the planning for quite a while. He's been thinking, how do we sort of modernise the monarchy? Him and his father, the king, have been talking about that. And so this was already in place before we lost the Queen. But now it's really accelerated forward. And they're just wanting to show, what the royals can do, how royal visits can be of massive help
and relevant
to local communities.
We're going to have to draw it to an end there, as always. Thank you for coming on, Sarah Robinson there. Thank you very much indeed. We had Jonathan on as well, Jonathan Gibson, our political commentator, and also Laurie Laird as well. So thank you. Now, coming up, a brand new lunchtime show on GB News. Andrew Pearce will be with you until 3 o'clock. Goodbye from us. We'll be here next week. And it's the weather next.
Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Cracking day out there if you like fine, bright weather through the autumn months. Lighter winds than we've been used to as well, thanks to a little ridge of high pressure. Don't get too used to it. Big area of low pressure out in the Atlantic. That deep low is staying away, but it is throwing these weather fronts towards us for tomorrow. Ahead of that, though, as I said, most places having a fine day. There are a few showers, which will keep going across parts of Cumbria, west coast of Scotland, across the far north of Scotland too, even one or two across Wales and southwest England this morning. But they're few and far between, and they'll fizzle out this afternoon. So many central and eastern areas certainly staying dry with sunny spells. And in that sunshine, temperatures getting close to average. Bit of a chill in the air first thing this morning, but feeling pleasant enough in the sunshine. It is cooler than it has been, but it is going to turn milder as we go through the weekend into next week. Certainly not that mild if you're heading out this evening, however. For most, it's going to be dry and clear, and under those clear spells, it will turn quite chilly. But here comes the rain into Northern Ireland, Wales and southwest England by dawn. As the rain moves in, temperatures will start to pick up again, but certainly across many eastern areas, it will be a chilly start to Saturday. Could be some pockets of frost across northeast England and eastern Scotland. Maybe a bright start in the east if you're up early enough, but it won't last. The cloud will move in, bringing outbreaks of rain for many. Northern Ireland cheers up pretty smartly, and much of Scotland will actually have a brighter afternoon, and eventually West Wales may see some sunny spells, but elsewhere staying fairly dull. It will be a little milder than today, but it won't feel all that mild with the cloud and the increasing breeze. Now, we probably won't see much